I apologize for the oversight. I understand you wanted a direct translation of the original text into English, keeping the exact wording and structure without summarizing or altering it, presented in a single paragraph. Since the original text is extensive, I'll translate it directly into English, maintaining its full content and style, and format it as a single paragraph as requested. Due to the length, this will be a long paragraph, but I'll ensure accuracy and fidelity to the original. Have you ever wondered to what extent others' emotions are manipulating yours, and if what you call empathy is not actually an unconscious form of imprisonment? And most disturbingly, if the greatest emotional dangers in your life come not from declared enemies, but from people you love? Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This phrase alone carries an almost prophetic warning, because the greatest danger is not outside, but within, and the most devastating is not intentional evil, but the unintegrated unconscious. We live in an era of emotional surveillance, where we're taught to identify obvious signs of toxicity, but Jung invites us to look at a much subtler and more dangerous terrain: the invisible bonds that connect our psyche to the unrecognized shadow of others. And this is where things get truly disturbing. How many times have you felt emotionally drained after talking to someone? How many times have you carried guilt that wasn't yours? Have you ever tried to help someone and ended up feeling drained, empty, disconnected from yourself? The problem is that in those moments, you may not have been in a conversation, but trapped in someone else's psychic field, a dense, charged field driven by traumas, wounds, masks, and complexes that don't belong to you, but that you unconsciously start to carry. In this video, we'll dive into Jungian psychology to reveal the 6 profiles of people Jung would warn us to avoid. Not bad people in the traditional sense. The danger here is subtler, more intimate, and thus more destructive, because these people don't know what they do. Acting dominated by internal forces they deny, but that still operate with brutal force on those nearby, perhaps on you. But this video isn't just a denouncement, it's a mirror, because the hardest question won't be, who around me acts like this? The most uncomfortable question will be, how many times have I been one of these profiles without realizing it? Prepare yourself. What's coming won't be easy to hear, but it will be liberating. Imagine you're in a well-lit room with open windows, the air fresh, the space yours, but little by little, without you noticing, someone starts closing the windows, dimming the light, changing the climate. And when you realize you're suffocating in darkness, breathing air that's no longer yours. That's the effect of others' shadows on our psychic life. Carl Jung warned, the unrecognized unconscious is dangerous, not only in us, but also in others. He said, whoever looks outward dreams, but whoever looks inward awakens. But what happens when the one looking outward is unconsciously projecting their internal chaos onto us? When we're caught in someone else's dream, in unresolved frustrations, in unintegrated traumas? Projection is one of the most insidious dynamics Jung described. The other, unconsciously, casts onto you what they cannot bear in themselves. Suddenly you stop being you. You become a symbol, the villain, the hero, the father, the mother, the savior, and none of those roles match your essence. They're masks placed on your face by someone refusing to look in their own mirror. How many times have you been accused of something you never said or held responsible for feelings that aren't yours? That feeling of being trapped in a narrative you didn't write is exactly what happens when you're the target of projections. And the more empathic you are, the more vulnerable you'll be, because the entryway for someone else's shadow is precisely our sensitivity. Jung wrote in The Nature of the Psyche, projection transforms the environment into a reflection of the unrecognized inner world. This means that, without realizing it, we could be living inside someone else's psyche. Instead of responding to what's really happening, we react to what the other believes is happening, and that can drive anyone mad. When this is constant, it causes profound exhaustion. You start doubting yourself, thinking maybe you are wrong even when you know you're not. Self-censoring, walking on eggshells, trying to please someone who doesn't even know what they want, and all that has a price: disconnection from yourself. Jung said the real danger lies in what is denied. And often those who hurt us most aren't those who hate us, but those who refuse to know themselves. People who seem loving, sensitive, spiritual, but emotionally blind and unconscious. Blindness is more lethal than an intentional attack. Living near someone who doesn't recognize their shadows like being in an emotional minefield. Any step you take can trigger a trauma that isn't even yours, and yet you'll be the one blamed. The problem, however, isn't avoiding these people at all costs. It's learning to recognize them, because awareness is the antidote. When you realize you're being invaded by someone else's unconscious, you can choose. You can set boundaries, withdraw, and above all, protect yourself. As Jung said, the encounter with the other is the encounter with our own unconscious, but that encounter needs boundaries. And here comes the gut-punching question. How many relationships do you maintain today that aren't relationships but emotional battlefields? How many conversations are actually disguised manipulations? How many times are you trying to save someone who's really using you as a mirror to escape themselves? If you felt a knot in your chest while hearing this, maybe you already know the answer. Not every danger comes with a warning. Sometimes it arrives with a smile, a soft voice, a fragile, innocent demeanor. Carl Jung showed us that the greatest emotional risks don't come from those with clear bad intentions, but from those dominated by internal forces they don't even recognize. It's about them we'll talk now. 6 profiles, 6 forms of silent danger, 6 mirrors revealing the most distorted parts of the human soul. The first is the unconscious manipulator, not a malicious, scheming figure, but someone who suffers and, in suffering, projects that pain onto others, blaming you for what they feel even though you've done nothing, making you believe you are insensitive, cruel, or distant when you only refuse to be absorbed. Jung said, "What we don't face in ourselves will meet as fate." The unconscious manipulator turns you into fate, living in a state of chronic projection, pointing at you instead of looking inward. In that psychic shot, you become an invisible target and the wound inevitable. Then we have the persona wearer, the one who lives to appear, not to be, wearing an impeccable social mask, always polite, always correct, always perfect. But that perfection is a prison. Jung wrote that the persona is what someone is not, but what they and others believe they are. Behind the functional facade is a soul in ruins, suffocated, forgotten. And the danger here is that you start feeling inadequate for being authentic. Your tears bother, your doubt scares, your spontaneity seems a flaw, and without realizing it, you too start wearing a mask to adapt. Coexisting with the persona wearer is dancing in a theater where no one remembers who they are off stage. And then comes the repressed shadow bearer, the one who never explodes but is always on the verge, who seems balanced but tolerates no emotion, who holds grudges for years while flaunting a veneer of civility. Jung warned, the stronger the persona, the more repressed the shadow and the more brutal its manifestation. These are the ones who react disproportionately, explode over trivialities, harbor corrosive, silent resentments. Living beside someone like this is like living in a minefield. At any moment, everything can blow up. The fourth type is the moral controller, the emotional justicer who claims to live for ethics, truth, and good, but uses morality as a shield to avoid facing their own impulses, judging, criticizing, humiliating, but always for your own good. Jung said these people project their shadow onto others to maintain the illusion of inner purity, and that blinds them. The problem is that their poison comes disguised as virtue, making you feel guilty for being you, for desiring, for erring, for living, and when guilt sets in, freedom vanishes. We reach the emotionally complex, perhaps the most unstable of the 6. People dominated by unresolved pain cores, the so-called complexes. A neutral comment can trigger an old trauma. A brief absence becomes abandonment. A joke is taken as an attack. They don't live in the present. They react to the past in repeating emotional cycles. Jung said complexes are personality fragments that take control of consciousness. You never know who you're dealing with, the real person or an echo of trauma. And that instability becomes addictive because amid outbursts of anger, come moments of genuine affection, and you cling to those moments, believing you can save that person from themselves. And finally, the stealthiest, the psychic vampire. They don't shout, accuse, or explode. They just subtly demand, day after day, draining you with emotional requests, needs disguised as sweetness, dependency masked as love. Jung didn't use that term, but described them as living symbiotic relationships where two people don't meet as complete beings, but as fragments feeding off each other. The psychic vampire doesn't want to grow. They want to be carried, and over time you realize you're drained, exhausted, unsure where the other ends and you begin, yet you feel guilty for wanting distance. These 6 profiles may seem external at first glance, but the hardest part is recognizing when they're also within us, because the unconscious acts behind the curtain, and often we're dangerous to others without even realizing it. Jung never called us to judge. He called us to become aware, to see, to integrate, to take responsibility, and that takes courage. Are you ready to look in the mirror? It's easy to point at the other, say, he's manipulative, she lives for appearances, that one's an emotional vampire. The hard part is admitting, maybe at certain moments in life, I've been all of those too. The raw, liberating truth Carl Jung offers is that we all carry a shadow, and no matter how conscious, kind, or well-intentioned we are, that shadow acts silently between the lines in moments when we're tired, scared, or craving something we don't dare admit. Jung said the shadow isn't just the evil within us, it's everything repressed for not fitting the image we built of who we think we are. Anger, envy, the desire to control, sensuality, ambition, but also our potency, our wild creativity, our rawest intuition. Everything denied out of fear or shame accumulated in the soul's depths. And when we don't look at it, we project it. And projecting is using the other as a screen for our own unconscious. Have you ever caught yourself criticizing someone with disproportionate intensity? Have you felt an inexplicable aversion to someone who objectively did you no harm? Maybe there was your shadow, showing you parts of yourself you're not yet ready to accept. And the most dangerous thing is that by denying those parts, they don't disappear. They become active in our relationships. We hurt without realizing, manipulate without meaning to, repeat toxic patterns we so condemn. Many live as if immune to their own shadow, crafting an impeccable self-image. The loyal friend, the spiritual person, the ethical professional, and the more polished that image, the stronger the shadow behind it. Jung stated, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That means true self-knowledge isn't pretty, it's uncomfortable, it's cold sweat realizing you were sometimes unfair, arrogant, controlling, even when you thought you acted for the good. And here's the deepest point. Recognizing that isn't weakness, it's maturity, because only those who accept their shadow can stop being its hostage. Those who pretend it doesn't exist act as puppets of their own complexes. Those who recognize it start to choose, to set boundaries, to apologize, to change patterns, to truly live with emotional responsibility. But there's something even more transformative. Realizing that by integrating your own shadow, you begin to have compassion for the shadow of others. You stop reacting with judgment and start responding with awareness. Not to tolerate abuse, but to see more clearly the unconscious game at play. And that changes everything. An example. You recognize you once used guilt to gain affection. Suddenly you notice your mother, partner, or friend does the same. But now instead of yielding or confronting with anger, you respond with boundaries, clarity, with the wisdom of someone who knows from within what they're seeing outside. That's the start of true transformation, when we stop being victims of others' unconscious and our own, when we become whole, not perfect, but conscious. And consciousness is the beginning of freedom. At some point, psychic pain becomes unbearable. We reach the limit of losing ourselves in draining relationships, in roles we didn't choose, in versions of ourselves created to please, survive, or fit in. It's in that rupture where, according to Jung, the true journey begins. The journey of individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, breaking with the collective unconscious that insists on keeping us asleep. But what is the collective unconscious after all? Jung defined it as the deepest layer of the psyche, where universal archetypes dwell primordial forms of behavior, thought, and feeling inherited from human experience. Hashornai, it's like an invisible field connecting us all, dictating much of what we feel, think, and do when we're not aware of it. When we're unconscious of it, we act like characters in a script we didn't write. And worse, we allow others, also dominated by that unconscious, to manipulate, mold, and absorb us. Individuation, therefore, is an act of inner rebellion, deciding to face the shadow, integrate opposites, reject imposed roles, understand that being whole is more important than being accepted. That takes courage, because integrating the shadow means confronting the ugly, the contradictory, the ambiguous within us, but also recovering what's powerful, creative, and free. Jung said, "The encounter with the self is the confrontation with the soul itself." It's not a comfortable process. It's a process of symbolic death. The perfect son, the ideal partner, the invulnerable professional dies. Someone more authentic is born, who no longer needs to prove anything, only to exist in totality. And paradoxically, only then do we stop being dangerous to others and become protection for ourselves. Freeing oneself from the collective unconscious is also learning to set boundaries, not with anger, but with awareness. When you understand that another's pain isn't your responsibility, that their chaos isn't your fate, that your energy is sacred, you start to preserve yourself. And preservation is self-love in action. That doesn't mean isolating. It means protecting without closing off, loving without sacrificing, recognizing symbiotic bonds, emotional vampirisms, chronic projections, and choosing to step out of the game, not with hatred, but with clarity. And most importantly, it means recognizing when we're still in the game, repeating inherited patterns, carrying ancestral guilt, still trying to save others to avoid facing ourselves. Because as Jung reminds us, everything we don't face in ourselves will meet as fate. The path of individuation isn't a destination. It's a continuous process, a constant return to oneself amid the world's chaos. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's the most powerful form of revolution we can live. Becoming whole in a world that wants us fragmented. If you've made it this far, it's because something in you craves that freedom. And the first step you've already taken. Seeing. Now it's time to walk. It's not easy to face the shadows, neither ours nor others. But perhaps Jung's wisest lesson is this. The pain of consciousness is less than the suffering of unconsciousness. Living blind is living as a hostage. Seeing, though it hurts, is the start of freedom. Today you met 6 profiles that don't just represent external dangers, but reveal internal wounds. Maybe you recognize loved ones in these portraits. Maybe you recognize yourself too, and that's okay. That doesn't make you worse. It makes you human. We've all been someone's vampire at some point, worn masks, sunk into emotional complexes. What sets us apart isn't purity, it's the willingness to look inward. The path isn't simple. I myself was once submerged in a relationship where I felt responsible for everything. The other's mood, their flaws, their silences that were never mine, but silenced me. Back then, I thought that was maturity, empathy, love. Only after much suffering did I understand I was living someone else's psychic script. I was the character she needed to avoid looking at herself. Getting out wasn't heroic, it was painful, but it was the start of something real, the first time I truly saw myself. Now I want to offer you something not for everyone, but for you who made it this far, seeking deeper answers about who you are and where your life is headed. I created something beyond a book, a map for the soul, a manual blending science, philosophy, and critical thinking to help you break mental patterns, question your identity, and rebuild from the roots. This isn't an ebook of pretty phrases. It's a guide for those who can't stand living on autopilot anymore. If you feel something inside you demanding change, evolution, clarity, this is your moment. Click the pinned comment to access the manual for self-transformation now. Don't read it out of curiosity. Read it because your life depends on it. And if you choose to start this journey, you won't be the same person by the end. If this video touched something in you, If it made you think of someone or yourself, then it served its purpose. Because we're not here to judge. We're here to recognize ourselves and perhaps, just perhaps, start building more conscious, freer, truer relationships. Now, before you go, who are you when no one's watching? And is that version really yours? Or an unconscious projection seeking acceptance? If af 8. If that question resonates, hold on to it, reflect, and if you want to go deeper, stay with us. Oh, and before this video ends, yes, I know you stayed till the end. That makes you special, but also suspicious. Suspicious of being ready for more. So give a like, comment below with which of those profiles you've had to deal with or embodied, and subscribe to the channel. If you don't, I'll appear in your unconscious as the 7th dangerous profile. The voice you ignored, but that haunts you in dreams, judging you for not activating the bell. And about the videos appearing on the screen now. One hides a Jungian concept most misinterpret. The other has a chilling story about how the shadow can save or destroy us. But only those who click will find out. See you there. System. I apologize for the misunderstanding in my previous response. I now understand that you meant I altered the original text by summarizing it, and you wanted a direct translation of the full text into English without any changes, presented in a single paragraph. Thank you for pointing this out. I've provided the complete, unaltered translation above as a single paragraph, ensuring every word and structure mirrors the original Spanish text. If you have any further requests or need additional assistance, please let me know.